So I'm only going to take on that part of Daniel, which is relevant to showing the Bible's inspired by God. And for me, personally, Daniel is my favorite book for making it so blatantly obvious that the Bible is inspired. It's those visions of Daniel. So I'm going to say just a couple of very quick things about the book in general, because it kind of sets the stage for the visions. Okay? I forgot this was here. Here's a reminder about our Apologetics certificate program. I've got some information here if you want. Some of you might want to consider that. If you would do it in a group, we would lower the price. Okay? So you buy one copy, and then each additional student would be significantly less. Anyway, think about it. All right? Apparently I wrote a book on Daniel. All right, great. Now the theme of Daniel is God rules the nations, do not fear. There are two main messages of Daniel as I see it. Basically, message number one is stay righteous, live righteously in a world that is very corrupted. The other one is God's in control, and please live as if you believe that God's in control. Now, of course, officially we all agree that God's in control. By the way, that doesn't mean His will is always done, right? You know, because there's people that don't obey God. But, you know, God is in control in the bigger sense. In the sense of all things work out for the good of those who love God and call according to His purpose. So the question is, do you really live? Does your life say that you believe God's in control? So that's one of the messages of Daniel. The other one is sort of the practical message about how we as believers, as disciples of Jesus, can live a righteous life in a world which is doing everything to cut that down. And now of those two messages, what we're going to look at today primarily is going to help us out with the second message, not the first. That's kind of the nature of Daniel. All right? The audience of Daniel is the Jews in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes in the years 167 to 164 BC as they're suffering extreme persecution. I forgot to get my notes. Now you might be saying, well, who's he? Which book in the Bible do you hear about Antiochus Epiphanes? The answer is in 1 Maccabees. You say, I never read 1 Maccabees. Well, you should. It's a great book. Now, I don't know if it's inspired. Like I said, of the books in the Apocrypha, the one that's in there that I could be convinced possibly might even actually be inspired, it's just me, this is my opinion, it's 1 Maccabees. Pretty awesome book. And 1st and 2nd Maccabees both describe the series of events that are the events that shows the primary audience. Now, if you want to think about Daniel in the Old Testament is the equivalent in the Old Testament of Revelation in the New Testament. Their themes are almost the same, and their scope is very similar. Okay? The principal audience of Revelation is the Christians receiving extreme persecutions under Domitian and the Roman kings that came immediately after Domitian. Now, all of us can learn a lot from Revelation, obviously, but that's the audience of the book. And when you study hermeneutics, it's good to know who the audience is. All right? And similarly, Daniel's written to a very persecuted people. The message in both cases is God is in control. Although it may not seem that way, God is in control even in this very difficult situation. Okay, got it? Now, the brief outline of Daniel is this. Chapter 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego under very difficult circumstances, giving glory to God in every circumstances. Why? clear, because they believe that God is in control, that God rules the nations. All right? So there's the fiery furnace. There's the lion's den, and all these things. Now, we're not going to study those chapters. We're just not going to do it because, although that's great, it's not relevant to what we're doing here in this class. Okay? The other part of Daniel is chapters 2 and 7 through 12. These are the visions of Daniel and the dreams that he interprets. Now, there is one dream in chapter 4, but just to keep it simple, we're not going to even cover that dream. All right, now, Daniel is a genre of literature for which there is literally only one book in that genre. It's a history book of the future. If you were to go into your library and ask, where is your section of books that reliably and without mistake tell the future? They would laugh at you. So Daniel is unique. Now, for those who want to undermine the reliability, the idea of inspiration in the Bible, those who really know what they're doing understand that Daniel is a key book here. All right? A lot of them go after Daniel because I'm telling you, man, those prophecies, man, they're amazing. And so what these people do is they try to say that Daniel was written after the events of 167 through 164 BC. That's what they say. But that doesn't make sense for so many reasons. All right? First of all, remember I talked about the Septuagint translation of the entire Old Testament, which was made around 250 BC, certainly completed by 200 BC. So that seems to imply that Daniel was translated into Greek as part of the canon of the Old Testament in 200 BC, which means it probably was not written after 164 BC. Now, I admit I can't actually prove that, but there's no evidence in reverse, and there's plenty of evidence in that favor. Also, Daniel, at least parts of it, are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, that particular little piece of Daniel, it's not large, is from around, I believe it's around 100 BC, 125, 100 BC. So I admit that is after 164 BC, but what that means is Daniel existed as part of the canon of the Old Testament, all right? And so accepted it was found everywhere, because to have one found there in Qumran says it must have been everywhere. So what we're saying is, because according to these critics, that whoever wrote Daniel is just a liar, a liar, claiming to have been there and witnessed these events and recorded them faithfully. So they're thinking that these Jewish leaders were so stupid and so ignorant and so gullible to put the book of Daniel into their canon, you know, when it only been written for about 20 or 30, years. This idea really defies, common sense. And they'll say, well, the Aramaic in the book of Daniel is a later kind of Aramaic, which is simply not true. Experts in the Aramaic religion will tell you, by the way, almost half of Daniel is in Aramaic, not Hebrew, if you knew that. And those who are the experts tell us that the Aramaic in Daniel is of the Eastern kind, in other words, not the Western kind the Jews spoke, from around 400 BC, more or less, plus or minus 100 years. They'll say, well, there are Greek words in Daniel. Proof that the Greeks had already conquered Babylon. Not true. What is the word for piano in Tagalog? Good. What's the word for guitar in Tagalog? Right. So what's one of the very, very, very first words incorporated into a language when you begin to interact with another culture? Well, the words for their musical instruments, obviously, because you don't even have a word for that thing. And the only Greek words in Daniel are those musical instruments in Daniel chapter 3. In fact, that's actually evidence for only minor interaction with the Greeks, not that they'd been conquered by the Greeks, in which case there would have been other loan words. Are there a bunch of loan words from Spanish in Tagalog? Yeah. English? Yeah. So, I don't want to waste too much time on this, but the bottom line is this. We can say with excellent confidence that Daniel was certainly written by 400 BC. And the only reason anybody believes differently is because they already assume that the Bible's not inspired. Now, if the Bible's not inspired, then how do you explain the prophecies, especially in Daniel 11? Even the most committed skeptic agrees that those happened. Well, the only possibility is that it was written after the events. So why do they believe it was written after the events? Because they believe it was written after the events and not because of the evidence. And besides that, we're going to see prophesied in Daniel things that happened in the year 96 AD or the year 30 AD. And in fact, those are fulfilled with an equal precision to the ones that were fulfilled in 165 BC. How do they deal with this? Very simply. They completely ignore it. All right. So anyway, I'm just telling you this. The book of Daniel is great stuff in terms of proving the Bible's inspired. All right, that's a quick version. Now I have to give a little bit of historical background for these prophecies to make sense. 722 BC. It's at my website. You can take pictures. I don't mind. But I already put the PowerPoint at my website. Evidenceforchristianity.org, and just click on the one that says, I don't know, Philippine lessons or something like that. 722, Northern Kingdom destroyed. 605, Nebuchadnezzar comes to Babylon. He did not destroy the city. He did not even defeat it militarily. Basically, they surrendered. They agreed to offer tribute, and as sort of a down payment on that, the children of the royal family were taken as captives. How do I know that? Because the prophecy in Isaiah says the children of royalty will be taken as captives. All right, so they're held as ransom, essentially. You pay the tribute, or I have your children. Then 597 BC, as I mentioned yesterday, they rebelled. He comes back. He tears down part of the wall. He sets up Zedekiah. They rebel again. He comes back in 586. He destroys the city. Now, there was a prophecy in Jeremiah, actually twice. Jeremiah, I believe it's 21 and 27, that sure enough, Jerusalem would be destroyed, and that the captivity would last for 70 years. Daniel goes into captivity in 605 or 606 BC. So for him, 70 years means 535 or 536 BC. Okay? Now, on the other hand, the temple was completely destroyed in 586 BC. All right? And the temple was finished being rebuilt in 516 BC, 70 years exactly, fulfilling that prophecy. Anyway, 538 BC, Cyrus the Persian, who's head of the Persian Mede Empire, destroys Babylon, not the city, but destroys the empire. And we learn about that in Daniel chapter 5, as I already mentioned. All right, great. The Persians and Medes take over. They treated the Jews relatively well, actually. Then in 334 to 332 BC, Alexander the Great comes. He destroys the entire Persian Empire, including, of course, taking the Promised Land, obviously. He dies without having children. His wife was pregnant. When he died, 4 dynasties succeeded him, and then a 5th later on, as we'll see. For example, Antiochus Epiphanes ruled as one of these Greek rulers. That's the time frame there. Between 167 and 164 BC is this terrible persecution of the Jews that is prophesied in Daniel. In 167 BC, the temple is desecrated, as I'll mention. And in 164 BC, the temple is rededicated by the Maccabees, Jews who kicked out the Greeks. Okay? Then the Greek power was finally finished off at the Battle of Actium, 31 BC. And by the way, that battle is prophesied and described in Daniel chapter 11, interestingly. Why? Because that's the final chapter in removing the Greeks. And of course, in 63 BC, the Romans take Jerusalem. And then the 4th kingdom. The first kingdom is Babylon. The next is Persia, Persia-Mede Empire. And the next is the Greek Empire. And the 4th is Rome. And of course, Rome plays a major role in Daniel, even though it was a tiny, insignificant city-state when Daniel lived. So, in 6 BC, an obscure village in the Galilee region, actually, it was in Bethlehem, but the parents were from there. This person was born who kind of changed history, as you know. I could give you the rest of the details, but you probably know most of that stuff. It's the time between the Testaments that you tend to not know much about. Okay, great. So here is the Babylonian Empire. Here is the Persian-Mede Empire. An unusual empire in that it was a dual empire. They kind of had dual kings, officially anyway. So it's not the Persian Empire, it's not the Median Empire, it's the Persian-Mede Empire. Kind of like the Austro-Hungarian Empire before World War I for you history buffs. Kind of an unusual situation. But it was a huge empire, look at that thing. And then, of course, the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, which was the greatest empire in the world up to that time, which was, of course, succeeded by Rome, for which I don't think I have a map. I don't. Okay. Now we're going to skip Daniel chapter 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to get straight to Daniel 2. So let's get into that. So now we're going to look at the visions of the future. Skipping about 10 pages in my notes here. All right. Daniel chapter 2. Ready?
Come on.
Okay. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So he summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, said to them, I've had a dream. It's kind of like Martin Luther King. Another joke. That troubles me. I want to know what it means. The astrologer said, awesome. Tell us your dream, then we'll tell you the meaning. So Nebuchadnezzar, he has a dream, and it's like a religious experience. This is clearly not just a regular dream. He realizes it's a religious experience. He wakes up and he says, oh my gods. Alright? So he needs to know the meaning, so he brings in all his court of, astrologers and mystics and, all these people to tell him the meaning of the dream. Now he knows these guys are a bunch of fakes. Come on, let's be honest. They knew this is just a bunch of stuff, So they say, great, tell us the dream first. And he said, no, we're not going to play that game anymore. Now this is the real thing, folks. And I need to know the answer from somebody who's the real thing. So you tell me the dream first, and then I'll tell you. And then you tell me the interpretation. Oh, not fair. You expect this to work a real miracle? Not like one where they just stop limping so much and, with their hand, their sprained ankle feels a little bit better. You know what I'm going after here, right? All right? Yeah, in fact, I'm going to kill you. Wow. Now, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, although they were not astrologers and magicians, they were in this group of court people who would be killed. So, Daniel says there's a God in Israel who can interpret the dream. Daniel gives glory to God, not to himself. That's important. So he goes away and he comes back and he tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream. He says, Neb, here's your dream. You saw a massive statue. Head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thigh of bronze, legs of iron, but one of the legs is partly iron, partly clay, and it's brittle. And then a rock starts, it's small, it gets bigger, and then smashes that thing to pieces. And then Nebuchadnezzar says, "Oh my Jehovah!" Because Daniel had interpreted the dream. Now let's look at the interpretation. Okay? Verse 36 of Daniel 2. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion. So where, according to Daniel, did Nebuchadnezzar get his kingdom? From Jehovah. God rules the nations. God rules your boss who's treating you cruelly. God rules your cancer. God rules your husband who is not faithful. God rules your bank account. Even though it says 0. If God can put Nebuchadnezzar in place and can take him out, do you think he could take care of your situation if he wanted to? But maybe he doesn't want to. Remember what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said? God could save us from this flame, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. See, they understood this idea. Anyway, reading on. You are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power, might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind, the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you rule over them all. You are awesome. You are great. Because I'm about to give you some really bad news. After you, another kingdom will come inferior to yours. Now, if you look at that map, was Persia inferior to Babylon? Not in terms of land that it controlled, but I would say this: Babylon was a much greater city than anything ever built by the Persians. But anyway, he's kind of buttering them up a little bit. All right? Next, a third kingdom will come, one of bronze, that will rule over the whole earth. That is, of course, Greece under Alexander. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, where iron breaks and smashes everything. As iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. What ancient empire would be better described in this way than Rome? Just as you saw that the feet and toes are partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so it will be a divided kingdom. Now, was Rome a divided kingdom? Yes. Under Diocletian, there were two capitals, and after Theodosian, there were literally two separate empires. east and west. How did Daniel know all that? That's pretty impressive. Let's read on. As you saw the iron mixed with clay, so the people will be a mixture. They will not be united any more than iron mixed with clay. In the time of those kings, it says, let me see. Right, verse 42. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. So one half will be strong, one half will be brittle. Exactly. Rome officially divided in 395 BC. Western Rome fell in 476 BC. Eastern Rome endured for over 1,000 years. You know what Daniel's done? He's given us a brief outline of the history of the Near East for the next 2,000 years. That's impressive. But it's nothing compared to Daniel chapter 7 and 8, believe me. All right? Then he says, in the time of those kings, which king? The Roman kings, to be exact. See, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms, bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. Right? Not by human hands. Can you think of a kingdom that was established during Rome that's still around? In fact, that is greater than all the nations and that will endure forever? Yeah, we're all citizens of that kingdom, aren't we? Yeah, great. But Daniel 7 blows this away, I'm telling you. Let's go to Daniel 7. Now, Daniel 7 is a vision of 4 beasts. A lion, a bear, a leopard, and a terrible beast. Okay? Now, these 4 beasts are the same 4 kingdoms. They are Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Okay? In the first year of King Belshazzar. Now, what year is this? Turns out the year is 553 BC. This is 22 years after the first vision. I'm sorry, 52 years. Daniel is now about 70 years old. He's still doing great. Anyway, Daniel had a dream and visions passed through his mind. He's lying in bed. In my vision, I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven, churning up the sea, 4 great beasts. The first was like a lion. It had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted up from the ground so that it stood on its 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. That is Babylon. This is a picture from the Ishtar Gate in Babylon. Lions cover the whole gate. It was given the heart of a man, representing the fact that Nebuchadnezzar himself gave credence and faith to God. Okay, great. Next, a second beast looked like a bear, raised up on its sides. It had 3 ribs in its mouth. You ever see the show The Flintstones? It's kind of like that, you know. Great. It was told, get up and eat your fill. Now, that's Persia. Guess how many great empires were conquered by Persia? 3. Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Okay, there you go. That's the 3 ribs. Next is a third beast. All right, it was like a leopard. It had 4 wings. Now, those 4 wings, we'll talk about that later in chapter 8. So I'm going to skip down to the 4th beast. After that, in the vision, and I looked there before me, was a 4th beast. Terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth that crushed and devoured its victims. It trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from the former beast. It had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me is another horn, a little one, which came amongst them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Now imagine you're Daniel. You're thinking, I got to write this down. All right, 10 horns, a little horn, little say, blah, 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 greater than you are, and you're knocking out 3 other horns. I mean, this is a really weird vision. When you